I'm Rashanah Baldwin, an award-winning TV and radio journalist, Chicagoan, and millennial. Someone You Need to Know explores the personal stories and journeys of trendsetters, tastemakers, societal change agents, and industry leaders. My goal is to introduce and connect you to everyday people doing impactful work across the country whose stories are often overlooked by the masses and often untold. Here's someone you need to know. Meet Harry Porterfield. To say welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. You have been doing prior to me, Someone You Should Know. I launched a web series, Someone You Need to Know, and one of my community elders, grandma, said, he used to do a show, a segment called Someone You Should Know, and you're someone you should know. Yes. And I appreciate the opportunity for you allowing me to interrupt your vacation, your retirement, to do this interview.
All right.
And this is, I want to have a conversation with you and really get your thoughts and opinions of the state of journalism and what have you been doing? Have you been keeping your eye on all of the news that's been happening?
Of course. I mean, having been involved in news business for so long, you can't help but try to keep up with what's going on because we're in a period which has never occurred before in this country, never occurred before. And I think it's important, if you have any sensitivity to the news at all and to history, to watch it. This is history of the making. And there's going to be a great deal that's going to be said and written about this period. It's so unusual. It's something you probably couldn't predict, even if you had to, how things are working out with the pandemic and with a president who doesn't want to quit. It's just, I think it's fascinating. I try to keep up with as much of the news as I possibly can. And I kind of wish I was somewhere on the fringes, maybe taking notes, but I like it better this way, see it from this vantage.
What advice would you give to some of the journalists out here just now in how to cover this, how to cover everything that's happening, and even with what we're up against of everything is all of a sudden fake news and we're extra scrutinized?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because there's so many facets to this. This is a time to be taking notes. So much is happening and so much is so unpredictable. And even at this moment, you don't know what's going to happen next. And that's kind of the exciting part of it. And it's a tragic part of it too, unfortunately. And with all that we know now, we're not sure how things are going to turn out. We hope it does the way we hope it would turn out. We don't know. And there's kind of an exciting intrigue in saying, I wonder what's going to happen next. What is Donald Trump going to do tomorrow? What's going to happen the day after that? And what's going to happen when he formally gives up being president of the United States? All these things are important to our lives, important to our future, and just important because what happens over the next few months is going to set the pace for what happens after that, which is going to be just as intriguing, I think.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting time to live in. I don't think in all the years that I covered news that I ever encountered anything like this. Things that one could never think of. And even if you're going to write a good novel, you could never think of what's happening in real life these days.
What would your key advice or takeaway would be to any journalist covering this climate at this moment? Could you imagine being in this and covering all of this? How would you explain or give it the tip to a journalist to keep, their composure, to keep their professionalism? Because not just a president, but even his party and others have attacked journalists across the board.
Yes. Well, I would take copious notes for one thing. Be sure that you document everything you do and see, and make sure that you keep a file of what's happening, because you never know when you're going to be called upon to be a witness to all of this. Or maybe you might want to write a best-selling novel for the New York Times. Who knows? But it's good to keep track of it and to single out maybe a part of it that you would like to follow. Maybe the legislative part of it. Maybe how laws are being made and remade and destroyed and overlooked. You know, there's a lot to cover, and at this point, it's, you know, I think I would single out one single part of it. I think I would single the legal aspect of it, and just keep notes on what's happening and what I think is going to happen. Yeah, but by all means, stay abreast and keep watching the next turn of events.
So you did Someone You Should Know. How did that come about? What was the thought process? What was the inspiration behind you creating it, launching it, segment, Someone You Should Know?
Yes, well, it was really not very spectacular. It came into existence, I guess it was 1975. And at that time, I was assigned to do a weekend show on CBS. I was working for CBS at the time. A Saturday news broadcast. It's on the air at 12 o'clock every Saturday. And the producer and I got together one day and said, you know, we don't have anything to put in this show. That was his feeling, because whatever we had was left over from the 10 o'clock news the night before. I said, and he said, you're right. So we need to put something different into the show, just to make it, you know, make it not just like the news that ran before or the night before, but something a little different that people might want to watch. So he said to me, you know, I've got an idea. And I said, okay, let's do a show and call it Someone You Should Know. And at this point, I'd be very honest with you. I heard this, I said, to myself, of course, I said, who is going to watch Someone You Should Know? What can you put into a broadcast that would make people want to turn on TV to watch Someone You Should Know? But of course, he was producer, and it was his idea. So we started out looking for unusual people doing unusual things. And I can't forget the first one we singled out were people who sold flowers on street corners. They're not around very much anymore. So I said, well, that's not bad. You know, you could ask them why they sell flowers and what they get out of it. So we tried it, and it was an absolute disaster. So what I didn't realize how vulgar some of these people were. And I couldn't get a straight answer out of anybody that didn't have a curse word in it. And we sit down and looked at it and said, that is not going to work. We can't put that on the air. Who cares? Who would want to care how these people feel selling flowers? And foremost, how can we get one single piece of sound from them that didn't violate all the laws, that didn't have a vulgarity sewed into it somewhere? So we dropped that idea. And then I don't know where the idea came from, but somebody had sent a letter to me. Why me? I don't know. About a young woman, and her name was, and you know, I don't know why I remember her name. This goes back a long time. Margaret Frommer was her name, and she worked at Northwestern University Hospital in a part of it that was devoted to some experimental works in how handicapped people to become useful. And her job was to be a receptionist, but a telephone receptionist. She'd answer the telephone, she'd make calls, call the people on the telephone, but all of her work was devoted to using the telephone in an office and contacting other people and making connections with other people who were calling in. Catch to the story. She was paralyzed.
Wow.
Absolutely paralyzed. In 1975, she was one of the few people who had contracted polio, which left her paralyzed. So the idea was to try and find a job for this young woman and give her an opportunity to see what she could do being a receptionist, telephone receptionist. How did she do it? Well, it was done by artists, and I've done a few of those. But what they did, she was able to do the job, and this is kind of hard to explain, using a device that she put in her mouth, and she held it between her teeth. You know, if you can picture a straw, just a straw, maybe what, about 6, 7, 8 inches. And with this straw that she clutched between her teeth, she was able to operate a switchboard, and she was able to do some typing. Now you can imagine this. She could type, she could answer phone calls, she could put calls on hold, she could switch calls, and she could function as a secretary. And even though she was not able to move, she was paralyzed. And I watched her, and I was really fascinated by it. And she was very good at what she did. And they're very happy that people who had devised this experiment, very happy with the way it worked, because she was able to do this although she was not able to move because of the paralysis. And then I learned later on that when she finished her job, she'd go home and paint using the same setup, you know, with a paintbrush between her teeth, and she would paint pictures, you know, as a hobby. Wow. And that was the first one, and we thought, you know, that's interesting. You don't see these kinds of things. So that was our first story.
Wow.
From her, you know, she was the paralyzed receptionist, and it went over, I think, pretty well. And I was happy with it. The producer was happy with it, but we weren't prepared for what happened. What happened was we got some mail from people, and they said, "We like your story. Let me tell you a story." And that was the beginning. That's how it all started. It was the response from viewers that kept this thing going, with stories like that one and others that were similar in nature. You know, highlighting handicapped folks, the kinds of things you would never read in a newspaper, or maybe in some magazines. So that's the way it began, with a few letters. I said, you know, this is not a bad idea. At least we'll have a source of this stuff, and we can put this thing on there every Saturday. And the stories started coming in, and then some of them were early whoppers. Some of the stories that I got from viewers were just incredible. I was in anticipation of all this. I was thinking about, you know, what stories can I look at that were really unusual, and some of them you just wouldn't believe.
That connection set the precedence of how, you know, many viewers felt the connection to you all to tell you your story.
Well, you know, one thing I learned from this, if any lesson was really important in doing Someone You Should Know, I realized there was nothing like this on the air. You know, nobody cared about handicapped people. I did a lot of, like Margaret Frommer, who's the beginning. I remember a guy who, somebody wrote to me about him, and I hope I have his name right, and if he's watching and it's wrong, he can fault me for it. But this is Herbert William Hoffman was paralyzed, and but he got a job in the United States, with the United States agency, and it was with the Weather Department, or weather information was gathered and disseminated throughout the country. And he was hired, even though he was paralyzed and in a wheelchair. He used a typewriter with his feet. Okay, so his job was to sit down and look at all of the reports coming from around the state of Illinois, as it was at that time, of weather conditions. And he would compile, this guy's in a wheelchair now, paralyzed. He would compile all of this information, and with what he was able to do, he would plot the way weather moved. So farmers who read the things that he wrote were able to determine when to plant and when not to plant. So it was an asset to farmers in the state of Illinois. And this is what he did. He compiled all of this, put it together in kind of a little digest, and it was printed and distributed to farmers in Illinois. And they began to rely upon this information to determine how they're going to run their business of farming in terms of what to plant, when to plant, when not to plant. It helped them run their business of farming. And yet Herb couldn't, Herb was confined to a wheelchair. He had to be wheeled to the office every day by his family. And, but he was successful at what he did. And that was the highlight of the story. That's what I did. That's how I closed it, you know. I mean, here's a guy who paralyzed, just like Margaret Farmer was paralyzed, you know, but they found a way around that problem, that handicap, and they made a success of their lives, even though they couldn't function normally. Not all of my stories were that way, but a lot of them were because I knew people were watching. I knew they were watching because they were writing us a bunch of letters. And I remember one day I got in the air and I said, one of my stories, I said, you know, we're getting a lot of mail, so give us a break. You know, we'll get to your story sometime.
Right.
They went on. Someone you should know, I'm very surprised, was picked up. I used to do a lot of speeches at schools, and you know, it was really, I was really impressed when I walk into a school and I see a sign on the wall, someone you should know for the week, which was taken from my series.
Uh-huh.
And they had their own little someone you should know series going on, picking up the students who went to that school who were doing outstanding things. So, and it was really nice to see that, how it spread. And some of the people I did stories on are just incredible. I wish I could think of them all. And in anticipation of this, I thought I'd sit down and write up all the ones I can remember, and I can't remember them all. There are a lot of them. They're in the hundreds.
What magic did you have to get them to, you know, trust you?
That's a very good question, because every story that I did was formalized. In other words, I have a way of doing it, and I do it by backing into a story. For example, I did a story on a judge, and I say, here's a judge who was esteemed, you know, he's respected by his peers and by the people who work around him, and even the people, the unfortunate ones who come before him, you know, have to respect him. And I'd lead it up that way. So he does this, and this, all these wonderful things. And then I hit him with a clincher, but he's blind.
Wow.
And so I talked to some of the lawyers who were in his courtroom and watched him and were able to express their how they liked him to me. And what I got from those I talked to, those lawyers who practiced before him, said, you know, the guy is blind, but he never misses. When you're lying, he knows it. He never misses. He doesn't have to see you to know you're not telling the truth. And that was the story, you know. And that went pretty well. We got a bunch of stories out of that one. One of them, a story that I really like to remember, we did right here in Gary. We're in Gary, by the way.
Oh.
Indiana. Took place, well, first place, it took place here in Gary because it involved a young woman who really, in her younger years, led a rather tragic life. Her mother and father died within maybe a week of the time that she gave birth to her son. Okay, so she had that on her mind and she had to live with that. Mother, father died. And her son was born, and she got some bad news. Her son was handicapped. And she was told that he will never live for more than 2 or 3 years. And how do you feel when you're hit with something like that? And I asked her that, and she said, it's just like life is all over, People who are close to you, are gone, and your son is handicapped. But that son, she said, she began to teach him. She was a teacher, and she got him enrolled in schools and areas where they dealt with handicapped kids. And she kept after him, and she kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him. And I was happy to read, won't believe this, this kid was given up by the docs. He was given up. They didn't think he could even live.
Wow.
I read in a newspaper in Gary that this guy was, he graduated second in his class from high school, the high school here in Gary, second in his class. Wow. He was second to the valedictorian.
Salutatorian.
But before that, I met him after he'd been in school for a while, and I heard her tell me how she just stayed on him. She went after him. She helped him with his work, and he's a kid. I couldn't believe this. This kid could write in Chinese.
Wow.
Yeah. It turned out he had a very brilliant mind. There's so many things he could do that ordinary people couldn't do. And yet the doctors had given up on him because of the way he was born, because they felt he didn't have the ability at that young age. I don't know what he's doing now, but whatever it is, he's making a success out of his life.
I'm gonna say, I know this is why so many stations have since did series or similar, whether it was spotlighting heroes, neighborhood heroes. I know that they came from, they borrowed ideas from your segment. Every station essentially has, someone you need to know, neighborhood hero. And that's all, stems from the work that you did over the last 2 decades. A question that I wanted to ask, and I don't want to hold you up too much longer. Is it ever an opportunity or a chance or appropriate time to have an emotion or even state the obvious facts of, what's happening in the world on camera, on TV, to call out the injustices that we saw? And what I'm saying is, whether it was on social media, so journalists, really addressing the years, the decades of the laws that worked against us, the statutes, the injustices. And it's like now, it's, all of a sudden, more journalists are speaking out about it.
Well, that's a hard thing to deal with. Because remember, you're not alone. When you're on the air, you've got writers who have probably written and contributed to what you're reading. If you're, say an anchor person that I was for a long time, and you've got a company and administration which is going to set policy, and it depends on the policy what you put on the air, which you may not like. And what you have to do is you have to sit down and you have to figure out if you're working with a station which has a policy which is contrary to what you believe in, but which insists that you write stories you don't think should be on the air, you should go find another job.
Mm-hmm.
There's gonna be a lot of that. Not so much when I was coming up. It was not the politicalization. I'm gonna try another word. That's tough one to pronounce. Oh, you just got to say to yourself, I'm here to tell people what I think they should know. And the first thing I want to impress with them is, I mean what I say. And I try to be honest with the story and honest with the people I deal with. You know, that's kind of a hard road to take sometimes, because sometimes there are things you don't want to get into because you don't think you're making any progress or contributing that's positive. You know, so you have to think about it, how you're going to handle it. Sometimes you handle it the right way. I didn't have that problem because it wasn't there. You know, those kinds of influences weren't around as near as I could determine. And if I thought they were there, I tried to do it in a way that nobody would get hurt and nobody would have to say, well, you can't do this. You got to remember that everything that's on the air and everything you see a newscaster read has been edited, has been approved. It ain't on there if it just didn't get approved. It ain't gonna be there. You gotta remember that, and you may not like that.
What do you do? Is there ever a medium? Is there ever a happy medium where you meet management and the journalists where they are? Because sometimes, as a journalist, we feel strongly about an issue that needs to be told, and management, like you just said, may not feel that way.
Well, it's up to you. You want to put up with it and get paid, or you want to go out and find another job.
Right.
You know, you're in this business, don't like it too much. Have something on the side that you could maybe turn to. You know, and be careful what you do. Be careful what you say. But be honest. Honesty finally does come through, you know.
Absolutely.
Believe it or not, I hear people say that, you know, he isn't honest. Or some people say, you know, I don't know if I trust that guy. You know, gives you an idea of what people are looking for. They're looking for news. If they're a news viewer, you know, they want to believe in you. And when you lose that, you must have given up. You must have given up. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Harry Porterfield. This was a great interview, and I appreciate having this conversation. I oftentimes, want to hear from those who before me and did great work. I appreciate it. You look great. I hope you're enjoying your time away from news.
Well, I guess I am. Well, I enjoy chatting with you, and good luck in all the things you do. And you ask very good questions, and that's important.
Thank you. Thank you.